Hi, everyone. I'm Josie Lenora, and I'm a reporter for KUAR 89.1 here in Little Rock. And you're listening to Issues That Matter, which is a panel style talk show we host with the Central Arkansas Library System. I want to thank the Central Arkansas Library System and the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County for helping organize this event. Tonight is the last in a series of panels KUAR and CALS have hosted about water in Arkansas. Right now, joining me on Zoom is Hallie Schaffner. Is that right?
Yes.
Hallie Schaffner, or Farmer Hallie, as she's known online, and also Cassandra Caldwell, who's the executive director at the Arkansas Waterways Commission. And I'm so glad you're both here. Thank you so much. I was wondering if first we could start by each of you giving a little background about yourself. Hallie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a sixth generation farmer in Jackson County, Northeast Arkansas. We grow soybeans, corn, rice, and wheat. We're about 2,200 acres total, and we do both some commercial farming, and we also do agricultural research in partnership with universities and ag companies.
And you know a little bit about water when it comes to farming. Is that correct?
Right. As it comes to inland waterways, rivers as roads, particularly, the way that we have a relationship with the river is mostly the Mississippi River, and that's how we get our agricultural products sold.
Okay. And Cassandra, do you want to give a little background about you?
Sure. I am in Arkansas. I just kind of transplanted here from Oklahoma about 2.5 years ago. I was in the Navy and when I was younger, and then several years ago, I kind of stumbled into the waterways industry, working with the Oklahoma Department of Transportation and their waterways program, and just learned all the things that I never even thought I wanted to know, and just developed a real passion for the waterways. And when this opportunity came open, I just moved on over here to Arkansas, and we have 5 navigable rivers here, so it's a lot more in depth than what I was doing in Oklahoma, and I really enjoy advocating for our commercially navigable waterways here.
It struck me when we talked on the phone how the rivers themselves are literally almost like highways. Could y'all talk some about that? Cassandra, do you want to go first?
Sure. They are, literally marine highways. The U.S. Department of Transportation Maritime Administration has a marine highway program, and they designate marine highway routes. The Mississippi River is Marine Highway M55, and the McClellan-Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System is Marine Highway M40. So we have 2 here in Arkansas, and basically they are designated that way because they take traffic, off of the highways. So, they're the numbers usually correlate to the nearest interstate that they take the most, trucks off of, basically by putting them on barges and, goods moving up and down the rivers instead of on the roads.
The McClellan-Kerr project, we were talking about this right before the air. Was it the most expensive? What was
it at the time? Yeah, it was just under $2 billion. It was $1.3 billion to construct the system. And at the time it was like the most expensive infrastructure project that the federal government had undertaken.
Hallie, as a farmer, how do these riverways affect your work?
Yeah, so I think when people think of rivers and farming, I think they mostly think of rivers providing water, which is certainly important. But when you talk about moving agricultural products, and if you're talking about the Mississippi Basin, you're talking about moving products on the Mississippi River, which for us is mostly corn and soybeans. And we just finished harvest on Monday, actually. And essentially the way it works is we take a combine to a field and we harvest our soybeans from a combine into a large 18-wheeler truck. We then send that truck to a granary who purchases our product. That granary puts our product on a barge and ships it down the Mississippi River. And the reason that farmers in Arkansas and in the Delta are so competitive, we have a competitive advantage because it is easy and efficient to ship on the Mississippi. And 60% of all grain in the US is exported down the Mississippi. So it's an extremely crucial part of the agricultural economy in Arkansas.
Have you ever had situations where you can't get the shipment in time? Is that ever a problem?
Well, it's kind of a lot of different things affect the logistics of getting soybeans from the field to the river. It's amazing how many moving parts there are, but so weather providing, if we can get it onto a truck and get it to a granary that is the same day, that is ideal. Most farmers aren't able to store their product, and if they are, it's very small amounts of soybeans they can actually store. So getting it to a granary very quickly is important. If weather slows us down, or if for some reason the granary can't take our soybeans, which right now we're experiencing a severe drought and much of the Mississippi is unable to handle normal capacity. If we take it to a granary and they say, I'm sorry, we can't send it anywhere, you're going to have to go somewhere else. That adds time onto our day. Those are soybeans that we aren't able to get out of the field because we don't have a truck available. There is just a lot of what we do hangs on what's going on the river.
How often do you think it happens?
The 2 years that I remember being the most problematic, nope, correct, that's wrong. There are 3. So in 2019, we had a big flood and the Mississippi River flooded. Water levels were so high, it kept barges from getting down the river effectively. And that depressed prices for farmers because essentially if you have supply and demand, if there are more beans piling up on the river that are unable to leave, that's going to cause prices to go down and farmers are going to get less money for our product. So in 2019, when the river flooded and the water levels became high, when barges couldn't move, we lost money. So last year in 2021, Hurricane Ida actually hit the Gulf Coast and destroyed some of the major exporters of soybeans and corn. And that was right when we were harvesting corn. And so that also depressed prices because if you can get it down the Mississippi, if it still doesn't have anywhere to go, that's going to be a supply issue as well. And then this year, of course, has been the worst drought that I've ever seen. And my dad says it's the worst he's ever seen since 1980. So we're in a similar situation. It's particularly extreme right now because there was a period of time when they shut the river down completely for us. And then after they opened it back up, I mean, we're only running at about 30% right now. So soybeans are piling up at the granary. They're actually dumping them on the ground right now. I mean, there are mountains of soybeans at granaries on the river.
So that was going to be my next question. I was trying to picture this in my head, all these soybeans. You don't just like keep them in your woodshed, do you? Do you just, where do you put them?
Yeah, so farmers build bins. You think of like grain bins or silos. I think most people think of silos, those big tubes, made out of metal. Most farmers have some storage, but usually not a lot. For us, we could maybe store 25% of what we actually grow, which means when we're harvesting, we're putting it on a truck. It is leaving immediately to go to the granary. The granary has, of course, massive amounts of storage. I mean, they can store millions and millions of pounds of soybeans. But if they can't get it down the river, they're going to run out of storage too. At that point, they either say, I'm sorry, we can't take your soybeans. Like you will literally show up in a truck and they will say, you got to leave. And you'll turn around and you'll take your product somewhere else or you'll take it home. Or in some cases this year, you will literally dump the soybeans out on the ground. And there are pictures on of Helena, West Helena, mountains of soybeans. You can see these excavators going up to the top of these soybean piles to try to level them out on the top. And they'll just put a tarp over it and hope for the best.
It sounds like something from a painting. That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
To leave it at. I was going to ask both of you about the way these droughts have affected waterways in Arkansas. Cassandra, do you want to talk about how droughts have affected the rivers right now?
Sure. The the Arkansas River isn't really affected because they have pools in Oklahoma, so they can do controlled releases if necessary. So that's why you don't see big sandbars in the middle of the Arkansas River right now. But the Mississippi River, it has been a significant impact for our industry. With the cost in shipping has gone through the roof. It's more than double what it was this time last year, and this time last year it was the highest they'd seen it in a long time. So it's really kind of cut into the cost savings benefit that the waterways typically offer for shipping agricultural products and bulk products. But you know, with the drought, I know that they're working on the dredging right now. The Vicksburg district, they are working on the lower part of the Mississippi, and they've got the draft restricted right now to 9'6". But it's typically a 12-foot draft, so that's a significant difference in how full you can fill those barges. And the problem right now too is there's a shortage of barges. So, you know, you're not able to fill the barges completely up, and then you can't really get more barges. So that's kind of what's going on right now and how it's impacting Arkansas anyway.
I have a thing I have to read. This is Issues That Matter, presented by the Central Arkansas Library System, KUAR, and the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County. We're talking about shipping on rivers in Arkansas. We welcome any questions. You can comment with your questions on our YouTube feed or Facebook if you're registered and watching via Zoom. Okay, but I would love it, Cassandra, if you'd say more about the shortage of barges.
Yes. So, I mean, you know, again, it's a supply and demand thing. So, you know, the barges are just in a great demand right now because part of, you know, a lot of the shippers that are in the upper part of the Mississippi, if they want to get their goods downriver, you know, since the draft is restricted, I had told you about before on the phone about how they were having to literally like park barges on the side of the river and just wait for rain or for dredging for them to be able to move the barges down because they were grounding. They were running aground. And so if you've got a barge that's already loaded, and you have to consider the fact that, you know, water transportation is not, it's not very expedient, right? It takes a little bit longer to get things where they're going. For example, if you want to go on the Arkansas River from Tulsa to New Orleans is about a 2-week time frame. And so, you know, you've got barges that are full that can't get all the way downriver and they just have to park. And the options are either unload some of those barges onto additional barges, but if you don't have additional barges to unload your product onto, then you're just going to have to sit there and wait until the water levels come up and you can get the rest of the way down the river.
When you say barge parking, you literally mean they just leave the barge and let it sit somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to tie it up, you know, to a mooring structure or something, but they're not going to be able to go down the river now.
Does that negatively affect the barge or the river itself, just leaving a barge there? Is it more problematic for the what's on the barge?
It's going to be more problematic probably for the shipper and, you know, whoever's product is sitting on that barge, because the problem with that is they start getting charged fees, you know, for demurrage, the product not getting where it's supposed to get in the time frame that it's supposed to get there. And so they'll be charged additional money, and it just becomes very costly very quickly.
We have a question from Mark Christ. Do the current low water levels on the Mississippi offer potential long-term improvement by making it easier to dredge deeper channels?
That's definitely a Corps of Engineers question, and I am not an engineer. But I don't know that, you know, I think that benefits to the low water levels for some people are, hey, they can get out and get some dock work done. Maybe get some of those kind of infrastructure related things taken care of. But I don't know that it'll make like long term make any kind of difference on how deep the river will be.
There was a number you told me, and I can't remember how much is it. A barge can hold like a really large amount of weight. What was the statistic?
Well, it depends on the draft. So the barges that that Hallie might be dealing with, she ships on the Mississippi River. They typically load to a 12-foot draft, and so that would be one tow would hold about 15 barges on average, and that is the equivalent of 1,050 semi trucks or 216 jumbo rail cars and one barge. Or 115 barge tow. So with the Arkansas River, we only have a 9-foot draft. So it's more like a 12 barge tow is what we look at. And it's about the difference of about 10 semi trucks per barge from a 9-foot to 12-foot draft.
You could fit 10 semi trucks on one barge.
Yeah. What the same amount that 10 semi trucks could hold. Yes, in one barge.
So that's a lot. Is it filled? Are those filled with soybeans often then? Those barges?
Yes, we move a lot of soybeans. We move a lot of soybeans, rice, wheat, a lot of bulk agriculture products, and also fertilizer.
So now I'm now doubly excited to Google these photographs of all the mountains of soybeans. See how much it must be. Hallie, you sent me a list of things that you can talk about. One of them you talked about was inland waterways. Could you describe what an inland waterway is?
Oh, there's really no difference between that and the Mississippi and the Arkansas River.
So the waterways, are those inland waterways that we deal with here in Arkansas?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Hallie, did you want to say more about the drought and the way it was affecting you as a farmer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with right now, in terms of a risk to our food supply chain, which farmers are of course very involved in, is our extreme weather patterns. So this drought is, I think, the most extreme we've experienced since 1980. The Mississippi River levels being at a 3-decade low. And we've really been hit, I think, time after time in the last 5 years with these extreme weather events. And it isn't necessarily that it's one weather system that rolls in and devastates an entire crop. It's more like a wound was opened and was never allowed to heal. And each thing that happens is mostly, it becomes logistically very difficult for farmers to make money. Not necessarily that prices will decrease or increase, although they have. It's more about how creative farmers have to get. So for the drought, for example, when they closed the river, and now that the river is not hauling and not providing as much product to go down, the soybean prices went down for a period of time. And during that time, for farmers who had storage, I heard of a farmer who took all of the corn out of his bins in order to put his soybeans in. And to take all the corn out, he bagged all of that into these huge 2,000-pound bags, which is a very creative idea if you don't want to sell your soybeans at a loss, but you have to spend the time to do that. You have to buy the bags to do that. You have to consider all these extra costs when you're trying to make money selling your product when prices are much lower. So I think that the drought is just another one of these instances in which farmers are getting very creative in the face of increased weather volatility.
What have you personally had to do?
So, one of the things that we are doing right now is we're trying to mitigate drainage issues on our farm. We're doing that by going to using conservation practices that are becoming much more popular in the South. One of those is reducing the amount of times we put a tractor through a field in terms of plowing or disking. So we're moving to a minimum till situation and cover cropping. That can actually allow, if we have a very, very heavy rain, which we are more likely to have in terms of rains, it's not just going to be an inch or two, we're talking more like 5 or 6 at a time. We can have a field that maintains its integrity, even in the face of that kind of weather. So there are practices that farmers are putting into place like that. In terms of dealing with these logistical issues caused by the river, I would say a lot of farmers, those who are able to make money, might put some of their equity into more storage, just to give us a little more control over what happens to our product.
You mean they might buy more storage space?
Right. So, I mean, that's something that we're thinking about on our farm, is putting up, big 5,000 bushel bins. Actually, that's not that big, but if you put up a 5,000 bushel bin, I mean, that's a lot of pounds of soybeans that you can hold yourself, as opposed to being forced to take it to the Mississippi River and having someone buy it at a lower price simply because they can't get it to where it needs to go.
You said these conservation activities are becoming more common in the South. Were they not used before? Why do you think they've become more common now?
Well, it's really soil nutrient management is kind of the buzzword right now. And that's basically farmers are thinking more about how to maintain the integrity of their soil. And a lot of that is related to a movement that actually has been going on for about 30 years, of people thinking about not tilling, so not running their equipment through their field as many times. That's actually a harder way to farm. It can depress yields in the beginning. It really isn't as easy. You have to pay a lot more attention to what you're doing. So I think in the past, we kind of got away from these conservation practices in order to make better yields more easily, have fewer inputs, or have more inputs and get a higher yield. And now farmers are thinking, well, we're now in a marketplace that is extremely volatile. There are risks to us in terms of logistics. We're now thinking, well, how do we put less into our land and use technology to get a higher yield? So we're moving into these conservation practices that are quite old, but they're coming back.
I got a question from the chat. As shipping by truck has gotten more expensive, is there a concerted effort to increase shipping by rivers? Either of y'all can answer that if you want to.
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you know, Cassandra?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to get more stuff on the river, right? Definitely, as the director of the Arkansas Waterways Commission, that is like our goal. We want to get more products off the road and onto the river. But not everything can move on the water right now. As you know, the way that our systems are set up, we primarily move bulk commodities, and also we can move like oversized machinery and things like that. But there is a huge movement right now for container on barge, and it's a big buzzword in the industry, and everybody I think is trying to get ahead of it and figure out how they can get a piece of it. And I know that we have in Helena, West Helena, we have at Helena Harbor, they have one of our grant awards went to them last year for the first phase of a container laydown yard. And they are planning on having a container on barge operation by 2025. So we're seeing a lot more of these efforts to try to figure out ways to get products that we wouldn't normally see moved by water onto the waterways. And there's some other rumors going around about people trying to create special vessels that will, be able to move containers, different kinds of containers, like refrigerated stuff, and they would move more quickly. They wouldn't be like, your typical barge and tow. But there is a big movement right now to try to figure that thing. The problem is you've got to get the infrastructure in place, and then you've got to get the big shippers, like your Maersk and these big international and domestic shippers on board with the idea.
What would a special vessel look like? Is that what you said?
Yes. We aren't sure. We have seen, I've seen some drawings and depictions, but they haven't been created yet. There's a company that has been talking about creating these. They're called it's a container on vessel operation, and it would move different products than what we typically. I mean, these would be vessels that could move things for Walmart's or Amazon or Tyson or companies like that are moving maybe smaller amounts of goods, but in specialized containers, and they need to get their product to its destination more quickly than what we typically see with the tow.
Is there a reason why, the question I keep having, is there a reason why we're using barges and not trucks?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why. It's more cost effective. It's more cost efficient. If you're moving a large amount of products, like farmers typically are, you've got tons and tons and hundreds of thousands of tons or bushels of your grain. It's just a lot less expensive to move it on the water than it is to move by truck or rail, because if you just look at the numbers of, it would take 1,050 trucks to move the same amount of product that you could move with one towboat and 15 barges.
Do you think the barge shortage or barge parking is affecting what consumers see when they go grocery shopping? Is it keeping products from being able to get into the stores?
No, I don't.
Because there's not enough transportation of the crops.
That kind of has a ripple effect. So if you're talking about, the food supply chain, the global food supply chain, you may not see a direct relationship between low river levels and grocery store prices. But what you are going to see is if you are increasing shipping costs overall, whether it's of a particular agricultural product, anything that's contained, any food that is contained or contains that agricultural product is going to be a little more processed. Is going to have to go through more steps essentially in the food supply chain. So if you're having to get creative about moving something and you can't move it by river and have to move it, say, by truck, well, the cost of moving that product is going to go up, and that is going to be reflected in what happens at the grocery store. That is going to have your trickle down effect. So I guess the short answer is, in general, yes. The Mississippi River specifically, I'm not sure.
Where do you sell the food that you grow?
So we do what most farmers do. We take it to the granary there's a West Helena granary. There are granaries pretty much everywhere in Arkansas, but it all goes to one place. It all goes to the Mississippi. I mean, we are very much a larger scale soybean, corn row crop farm. So we're not talking about produce. I'm not actually familiar with produce, and I don't think a lot of produce actually ships on the Mississippi. Cassandra can correct me if I'm wrong. I think as far as what goes down the Mississippi in terms of commodity, I think it's like 22% is soybeans and corn. So it's nearly the majority.
Are a lot of farmers in Arkansas that they take their food to the granary? Is that commonplace?
Yeah. We don't really think of it as as food. Exactly. I mean, soybeans are primarily grown for animal feed, corn and soybeans primarily. It's a lot of animal feed, oil as well. So pretty much if you've eaten fried chicken, you've had something that's been that has soybean oil in it. So yeah, we sell it at granaries unless it's being grown for either seed production, which means it's being grown to be planted the following year, or some farmers do grow non-GMO soybeans that are processed in special places and not actually exported. There are some non-GMO soybeans now. Farmers are getting very creative about our commodities, and those are being shipped to Japan, because in Japan, non-GMO soybeans are very popular. But again, those go down the Mississippi River.
Yeah, get back to the river
Right.
topic that we have tonight. I have a question from the chat. Can you talk about the history of shipping on rivers? This really was the earliest way of mass shipping in the U.S.
I do not know the history of shipping on the rivers.
Okay.
I mean, I think I can kind of speak to this anecdotally. I mean, I think that I think a lot of people think that the United States was founded on the East Coast, but I really think that America was born on the banks of rivers, right? I'm from Jackson County, and the county seat was founded on the banks of the White River. And the reason is because you could easily transport people and products, and communities had to be built where the action was. Mm-hmm. Plus, agriculture grown on that really nice silt loam that's in the that's outside the river. It yields really well. So you had communities built up around rivers. I mean, that's really where America was born. And when railroads became a thing, the county seat, Jackson Port, they called it on the Wright River, the Jackson Port. When the railroad was built several miles away, Jackson Port dried up as a community, and everything switched to where the action was, which was at the railroad. And so they created Newport, which is where I'm from, where I went to high school. So I think that in terms of the history of shipping on rivers, that was really how civilization started. I think we've become a lot more sophisticated now in terms of the diversity of the ways that we ship. And I imagine that over time, we've become very sophisticated in the ways we control water, maybe to our detriment, perhaps, I'm not sure. But, and obviously the river has been so important culturally to us that we've, honored it in art and music and literature, and perhaps we're a little less reverent today. Maybe we should be more.
I was thinking about Huckleberry Finn when you were talking about it. I was like,
right. Yeah, exactly.
The whole book. You mentioned a question I forgot. Is the farm that you farm, is that near a river?
We are near the White River. Mm-hmm. Although we're closer to the Cache River, which is much smaller. And neither of the Cache River would not be considered an inland waterway. I sort of think of that as a commercial, a river that can move products commercially. I'm not actually familiar with how much the White River can haul. Maybe Cassandra knows. Do you know anything about the White River?
Yeah. Yes, the White River is actually commercially navigable up to Newport. From Newport to the Mississippi River, technically, right? It's federally authorized for commercial navigation. Unfortunately, the Corps of Engineers has not dredged or snagged it in a really long time. And so the White River is one of those unique rivers in that a lot of the time it's naturally navigable because it has really high flows. But it still needs to be dredged and snagged, and when it's not reliable if it's not taken care of the way that it needs to be taken care of. And so we're actually working with the Memphis district right now to do a study, and they're supposed to be getting out there and doing some snagging on the White River because there is a very large demand from that region and farmers in that region that they would like to be able to use the White River to move their products to the Mississippi.
Yeah, that would be great because right now, when you sell your product at a granary, you're paid what's called a basis. It's essentially kind of like a premium, and it depends on how close to the river you are. So if you sell your product in Newport, which is 80 miles from the Mississippi River, you are going to get a lower price than you would if you drove directly to West Memphis. Um, but West Memphis being 80 miles away, it takes up a lot of your time, a large part of your day, a large part of your the trucks that you're sending. You know, it might take hour to 3 hours to actually unload your soybeans once you get there. If we could sell on a river like the White River, we could get a better price, which would be really ideal considering how far we are from the Mississippi.
Can you explain what dredging and snagging is for the listeners who don't know? Or even for me, I don't know. What is dredging and snagging?
Sure. Well, so I don't know if you've ever been near a river and you've noticed like there's some, maybe the banks are eroding a little bit and you might see some trees that have fallen in or, branches sticking up out of the river. Snagging is where they go and just kind of clear those obstacles out of the river. Dredging is where they actually go in and dig out, the river bottom to ensure that the navigable channel part of the river is deep enough for barges and tows to go through.
Oh, we have another question from the chat. What do you think is the best thing that can be done to help river shippers?
I'm not actually sure. I'm very interested to know in terms of improving the river specifically. And Cassandra, you can probably answer this question. When I think last year there was a lot of talk about them dredging the river and adding, I think, something like $146 million to agricultural revenues because you could increase the amount of product that moved. Is that in Yes, that's better for shippers. Is that environmentally friendly?
Well, it depends on who you ask. And certainly before projects like that can be done, you've got the game and fish that have to get out there and ensure that it's not going to have a negative impact on any endangered species or habitats or anything like that. Because I know for a really long time, the least tern, I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a little bird. And they were on the endangered species list. And so with the McClellan Cur, in order to do any dredging in Oklahoma, they had to mitigate and create these least tern habitats. So and now they've recently been delisted, so that's good, but we still don't want them to go back on the list. And so, it's just kind of finding that that balance, with not causing harm to the environment, but still ensuring that the rivers are safe for commercial navigation and recreation as well. It can be detrimental and very dangerous if the rivers aren't snagged and people get out there on their kayak or in their boat to go fishing and don't know that there's a tree underneath them or something. It can get really dangerous for people. So
Has that caused accidents in the past?
I'm sure it has, but I don't know of any specific incidents that
Well, I know
speak to.
on the White River, they're very cautionary about that.
Yeah, it's a concern. It is definitely a concern, and that's one of the concerns that I brought up to the Memphis district when we talked about, hey, we need to have a plan here and start working towards getting reliable navigation back on the White River. And that's one of the things that they're looking at because it's also dangerous for recreation.
Were there other things that you pointed out to them when you were talking about the White River?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that. That's a major concern. And then of course, you know, the strong push. I know the farming community in that area. So here's part of the problem is the Corps of Engineers does not, if there's not a commercial interest, they're not required to dredge. And so this is one of those things that's kind of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because let's say there has been commercial interest, and for example, Bunge is a company that had terminals up and down the White River for many, many years.
We miss Bunge.
They and they closed all their terminals because of the lack of reliability on the White River. So it's kind of the way that they look at it and the way that they're funded for dredging is based upon the amount of tonnage that moves on the waterway. So the Washita River is a great example because we had barges moving on the Washita in Arkansas up until like 2015. But the tonnage got lower and lower and lower. It's considered a low use river. And so the Vicksburg district wasn't provided very much funding each year. I mean, the funding just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller to where they couldn't afford to even get a dredge contract and go above the Louisiana border. So what ended up happening was, because the reliability went down to zero, the last shipper that we had on the Washita River pulled out and said, hey, you know, we're going to have to take our operation somewhere else, because if we can't rely on this transportation source, then, you know, we can't afford to be here. And so they moved on, and then of course the Corps is like, well, see, there's no commercial interest, so we don't have to dredge. And so they don't even try. But the problem is, you know, if there is commercial interest, so with the White River, it's a little bit different because there is commercial interest in that the farmers are definitely interested. And the company that purchased all of those Bunge terminals is definitely interested in reliable navigation returning to the White River. And so part of what my position is to act as that liaison with the Corps of Engineers and with the federal government and say, hey, look, we do have this commercial interest, and we need, you know, we need to come up, they're partners, right? We consider them partners, and we just need to work together to find a solution to make this happen.
In being a liaison, do you find a lot of tension when you're trying to communicate between those two groups of people, or?
For the most part, I really don't. I think that we've been really fortunate here in Arkansas to have some great leaders with the Corps of Engineers districts that we work with. And I really haven't had any trouble with them. It's been, now there are people, you know, on the other side, in the industry side, that are not big fans of the Corps of Engineers, but I have a really good working relationship with them. And I think that that's the most important part, you know, for them to know that I consider them a partner, and then we can work together towards a solution.
Is there something in your job that gives you optimism?
Well, there's a lot of things.
Oh, really? Tell me about it.
Well, I mean, it's just, you know, I love the relationships that I get to build. You know, we've had a lot of success with the MCARNs as far as like funding and things like that. One of the things that we've seen over the past, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 years with our waterways is the federal government funding has been just decreased. You know, they fund the Corps of Engineers Civil Works program, and that funding amount has just been going down, like consistently going down every year. And, you know, things are more expensive. They get more expensive all the time. So the cost to maintain and operate these systems is going up. And so we've done a lot of work with advocacy work with the MCARNs and groups. We just have a really great group of people that are all, it's really funny, they're all competitors, right? They're all competitors on the system, but we can come together and go to DC together and you know, we have this common goal, right? Because if the system is in good shape and it's properly funded and the projects and they're able to operate and maintain everything the way that they should, it's good for everybody, right? If the system is not operational, it's bad for everybody. So it's you know, it gives me a lot of optimism just to be able to work with people that, you know, that are competitive against each other from 9 to 5, right? But at the end of the day, they can all come together, you know, and work together for a common purpose of keeping that river open. I mean, that's one of the things that I love the most, is seeing that. And I would really love to see more of that with some of our other rivers, but there are some challenges, especially with our smaller and rural areas and you know, but the fact that I've seen it work with, you know, with the MCARNs gives me hope that we can make something like that happen for some of our other smaller ports and terminals too.
Can you say more about the challenges in rural areas?
Well, there's a lot of challenges in rural areas. They, you know, for one thing, you have less population for one, and then there's not as much money. Usually you've got people in positions, leadership positions, like for port development and stuff, that is not their sole job, right? Like they are also economic developers and they might work for the housing authority and, you know, all these, they might, you know, wear a lot of different hats. And so it's really difficult for them to get projects done. These federal grants that a lot of our ports and terminals apply for are very think of the word right now, but I mean, they're very in depth and they're very difficult and they're very competitive. And, you know, with our larger ports in areas that are with a higher population, like Little Rock, and if you think about Tulsa, for example, you know, you've got these bigger ports that have more support. They have the resources to, you know, hire somebody full-time to be a grant person, right? And do all of the grant work and apply for these federal grants. I'm talking the Port and Infrastructure Development Program grant this year. I think the notice of opportunity for funding was like almost 100 pages long. So, I mean, and that's just that's just to read about. The application process is even more extensive. And so with our rural areas, you know, they're kind of at a disadvantage there. They don't have the resources and the manpower, the cash flow to go after some of these federal funding opportunities that some of the bigger places can go after.
Y'all both mentioned this earlier, and I kind of want to jump back to it because it sounded interesting. You said that there might be more creative ways to control the water in the future. I was wondering what y'all meant by that.
For us, it's funny because we, and yeah, I've been primary operator of the farm since 2016, and I think so much about water. I mean, I think about water all the time, especially when you're having a drought, but I don't really think about water in terms of transportation, because generally when I take my soybeans to the granary and they pay me, they write me a check and I'm like, all right, so it's done. But then we come upon years like this, where all of a sudden the drought that has frustrated me all year in terms of my irrigation, the trying to control the water that I use on my farm, all of a sudden that drought has extended into another area of my farming operation that is now causing me further headaches. In terms of how farmers can control water, it's of course, I think, a bit different than commercial shipping, but we are working on ways to use less water. on our farms. And it kind of comes back to that. Oh, it doesn't kind of, it very much comes back to those conservation practices. And I'm very encouraged because the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed, put a lot of money, I mean, billions and billions of dollars into USDA programs to allow farmers to do things like become more efficient in terms of water usage, whether that's using technology or whether that's changing the way that we farm. We are better able to control the water that we use on our farm. And I think that allows us to have a lot more, we're able to mitigate our risk over things that we can control, as opposed to things that we can't control, which is what happens to our soybeans once they actually are taken off of our trucks.
Are you going to see some of that Inflation Reduction Act money?
I hope so. We've applied for it. So crossing our fingers. I hope someone's listening. I mean, there are billions of dollars. I don't think that any of that's going to be awarded until next year. But we have put in an application for, there's a lot of money going into the EQIP program, EQIP, and that helps farmers who want to get started doing conservation practices. Like it'll help you buy cover crop seed if you want to try cover cropping, or it'll help you with drainage issues in particular fields, or it'll pay you to not till your fields at all. So we're looking forward to that. And we actually get, you get incentives if you're in a particular watershed. So it just kind of depends on where you are, but we're looking forward to seeing some of that extra funding.
Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left. I'm wondering if either of you have certain topics that you want to cover that we haven't gotten to when it comes to rivers or water in general.
I think just that, the levels on the Mississippi River right now, and really the last several years where we've experienced transportation issues, I think is very much a trend that we're going to see. I think that our changing climate is going to be something we're going to have to address in terms of our global food supply chain. And for farmers, we're working on addressing that in the ways that we can, which is in the field. That doesn't give us a lot of control over what happens once our product leaves our field. So once it actually goes down the road from production to eventually ending up in the grocery store. And we know that a disruption in any part of the global food supply chain, including shipping, whether it be rail or interstate or river, we know that that is eventually going to affect how we sell our products, but also affect how much a consumer is paying in the grocery store. And I shop at the grocery store just like everybody else. So I'm very concerned with that as well. So I think that when we're thinking about Arkansas waterways, I think we have to think not just about how we can improve that specifically, but how we can address the changing climate as a whole. Because unless we do that, we are basically just fixing one problem after the other.
Are there certain solutions that you're interested in?
For me, of course, again, it kind of comes back to what I can control, which is on my farm and advocating for practices that are going to help farmers reduce our own carbon emissions. There are a lot of ways that we can do that. Farmers are about 10% of total carbon emissions in the United States. And as a farmer in this industry, working on some of these practices, I am hoping that other industries will step up and say, we see what American farmers are doing. We see that American farmers are concerned about our changing climate, are concerned about the ways that it's going to affect the food supply chain, and will support American farmers by reducing our emissions as well. So I think it has to be an overall effort.
Cassandra, what about you? Are there certain solutions as it comes to riverways that you're interested in?
Yes. I think that, which I don't have enough time to really go into all of this, but the method that is used to determine funding for the Corps of Engineers is faulty, in it's based on tonnage, and tonnage is not, there is no uniform accurate way to record tonnage. Tonnage is determined by looking at the draft of the barge. And it's basically like eyeballing it. Yeah, it looks like it's about 1,500 tons, right? And the problem with that is the way that information is collected and the way that it's used to determine how our federal dollars are going to be spent and how they're going to be divvied up amongst these different Corps of Engineers districts for different rivers. And this is why we're seeing such a significant impact in Arkansas specifically to our smaller ports and terminals and harbors. We've got, issues in Osceola, which sits right there on the Mississippi River. And, we've got major steel industry there moving 2 million tons a year. But if you ask them and look at their records, it's showing that there's 0 tons moving off of that dock. And so what happens is, Osceola ends up getting shortchanged, right? And the funding is not consistent from year to year. So, hey, they might get funded this year, but they may not get funding for dredging for another, 5 or 6 years, or we might have to really fight for it. And that makes it very difficult for these ports to develop and for them to make plans, right? Like it's really hard to attract industry or to grow when you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to use your dock from year to year. So I think that and this is something that I have really been advocating and pushing for. I've given testimony to the Mississippi River Commission about this. And it's something that they're actually interested in and working on too, is that there's got to be a better way to determine the funding so that it can be a little bit more consistent and that we can keep these waterways open, so that the White River can get the funding that it needs so that it can be a resource for the farmers in that area, like Halleck, right? And the Washita as well. We're looking at, you've got major defense industry down there, and it would, be very helpful if they could move some of their products on the water. But again, the Washita hasn't been dredged or snagged in many years. And so, and it's all because this kind of faulty funding mechanism that's it's just the way it's always been, right? And I'm just not okay with that as an explanation as to why we do things. I think that we need to be progressive, that we need to change as things change. And as we realize that that's not the most efficient way to do things, we should change it, look for solutions. And so that's one of the things that I'm kind of working on right now.
Okay, that was really great information from both of you. This was Issues That Matter, a program presented by the Central Arkansas Library System, KUAR, and the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County. Again, that was Hallie Schaffner, who is a farmer here in Arkansas, and Cassandra Caldwell, who is the Executive Director of the Arkansas Waterways Commission. And I'm so grateful that you both sat down to talk to me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so we are done.